Hi, welcome to the 25th episode of Startups Right. Today, my guest is Dr. Ashwin Nandakumar. He is the co-founder of Granza Bio. Welcome, Ashwin.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for having me, Javed. Happy to be
No,
here.
it's my genuine pleasure. As we already mentioned, it's been quite a while in the making. I'm so glad that we made this happen. Um, obviously we'll talk more about the company, about everything else, but as I always do, I like to start the conversation with the background, right? I want to know more about you in your own words. So go ahead.
Do you want the short version or do you want the long
Take
version?
as much time as you want.
I grew up in a small town in India, in Kerala, and ever since growing up, I was always obsessive about biology. Um, but I thought I wanted to be a doctor, like a clinician, and not go into science. I was always fascinated by deep science, but didn't really know there was an opportunity there. Then went on to do my undergrad in America and then in London in Kingston University. And in my final year, really, is where I had the chance to work in labs. Specifically, I was working in pancreatic cancer, where I really understood the complexities of, different cancer models. And it sort of came to me as a puzzle. And then that's really where I made a decision that, hard science is more exciting to me on a day-to-day basis than thinking about a clinician. Although clinicians are amazing at what they do, I really enjoyed that everything was a puzzle in the scientific side of things. Went on to do a PhD at Oxford after in oncology, which was really fascinating, which showed me the difference between what academia could do and a glimpse of what the translational world looked like, because my project was quite translational. After that, did a postdoc at the Institute of Cancer Research in London, and then went on to start Granza Bio.
Yeah, very cool, very interesting. Actually, there's similarity in our backgrounds. I mean, besides being interested in science and biology, I also ended up going to US for my undergrad, and I was also pre-med.
Yeah.
So my question is, then you switched to UK, and then you ended up doing your PhD in UK as well. What made you choose and stay UK? I mean, I'm not talking maybe not about undergrad, but let's say for your PhD. Why did you decide to stay in the UK?
Um, Frankly, I didn't consider US as an option
Mm,
for my PhD. I think after my undergrad, I was in a situation where I looked at all the London universities, looked at Oxford and Cambridge, and it was just, the thought never occurred to me to go back to the US. Maybe because I spent after coming back from the US and moving to London, I had a lot of friends here, a lot of friends like family here, and I like the ecosystem um, enough for me to stay. So that was mainly the reason. Although obviously, doing a PhD in the UK is very different from Europe
and
or
yeah,
America, right? The length of time, the work you have to do, all of it is very different. And perhaps the UK version is a bit quicker.
mm,
At least the undergrads in the UK are 3 years as opposed to 4 years. So timing obviously was always in the back of my mind. But when I got an interview offer from Oxford, I think everything else kind of
it's
separated,
just
and my goal was pretty clear.
got it. What was your plan to go into academia and just stay in academia, or was entrepreneurship a plan from like the get go?
hmm So in my undergrad, I had a PhD supervisor who actually did his PhD and was very keen on entrepreneurship. And that's really the first time I heard about entrepreneurship and what are the possibilities of what could be done. So I was really fascinated by it. But maybe more so, I was fascinated by science. But it was good to know that there was a different option to academia that exists. And then when I started doing my PhD in Oxford, and I was, really immersed in academia, that's really where I understood what are the pitfalls, let's say, and what are the good things, what are the bad things, and that's really where I had the impression that academia might not be for me, and I wanted something a bit more translational, something where we could take that amazing basic research or research generated in academia and take that to the next level, which is somehow getting it to patients, and that was always my something that drove me. During my PhD at Oxford, my supervisor was diagnosed with cancer. So, the more I stayed in that route, the more I realized that there's different things that could be done. and maybe your amazing your scientific research shouldn't just be focused on trying to publish a paper and then continuing in that cycle. Maybe there's the next step is to take that work and somehow get it to patients.
Got it. Was Oxford helpful in that way, like in really kind of stimulating your entrepreneurial spirit and just like really helping, giving you the resources to go further? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, there were so many different opportunities, so many different programs, so many different accelerators in Oxford, also in London as well. So I remember taking part in a few, and with my housemates, real close friends, trying to understand how this whole ecosystem is. Although you realize how different the real ecosystem is as opposed to when you get started. But I think that foundation was very important. And I think it helped me understand a lot more about what could be done and how things are done. When you think about just a scientist in the lab, it's a very different field and world, isn't it? I didn't even know what a VC was when I started my VC. So the trajectory of learning was massive. And the business school at Oxford also offers a lot of kind of entrepreneurship classes for academics, for PhDs, for postdocs, which I think is really, really nice and an amazing opportunity for students or postdocs to know what is the other side of the equation.
Got it. Got it. Now, I guess time to start talking about your company, right? I know your research has been in oncology, and your company is also related to oncological research. But I'm just curious, like, what inspired you to come up with the Granza Bio? How did you start? And actually, tell us more about Granza Bio too.
Sure. Well, the concept of Granza Bio was discovered in Professor Mike Dustin's lab, where my co-founder, whose name is also Ashwin, did his PhD in. So there's two Ashwins in the company, and let me tell you, that Ashwin is one of the smartest person I know. I I met him, I think, in my first year or second year of my PhD when someone accidentally sent me an email, which is for the wrong Ashwin. So
Oh,
I knew someone called Ashwin existed, but I just never knew who that person was. Later on, we started collaborating on a T cell project in prostate cancer, and a researcher introduced me to Ashwin. And in fact, we worked a lot on that project, and that project was a huge part of my PhD. So Ashwin and I kind of developed a working relationship in a very interesting, different way than most people, would normally meet. But what I really enjoyed when I was working with him was his enthusiasm and how his brain worked and how he saw the problem differently. And I think I was always like fascinated by that. So Ash and I always kept talking about what are the different possibilities of what you can do, and he was very keen on this translational element as well. We never really thought of entrepreneurship when we started the conversation. It was mostly trying to get a paper done or trying to get this research done. But just one day, the opportunity of Y Combinator kind of came up to me, and I was thinking of who would complement my skill set, and who really is the smartest person I can work with. And that was Ashwin. And we got together and we were like, what are the different projects that we could do where we could combine the oncology and immunology expertise together? And Granza Bio came up.
really cool. Really cool how you guys actually, it makes you believe in fate, right? Like this random email. Really interesting. And Ashwin, choosing co-founder is a really hard thing, right? Because startup is like a bit of like a marriage. You're together for a while. You're gonna have difficult moments. You're gonna have good moments, and you kind of have to. Um, and how do you? Obviously, this worked out just fine and well for you guys. But like, kind of like going back in hindsight, just like looking at things. How do you think a biotech founder should approach finding their co-founder or startup founder in general?
I think places like universities are a fantastic place
Mm-hmm.
to actually find a co-founder, because I feel like after it's hard to get,
Mm-hmm.
like-minded group of individuals to kind of mingle with and find a co-founder. Universities just, clusters all of these people together who are excited about working on a particular thing. So doing it early on is a fantastic way. And most often, it's usually the people you might already know who are interested in, rather than just finding someone new. And maybe that is the case. You just find someone new. But obviously, getting to know that person a bit before is very important. And there's, I think, maybe 2, 3 important things the way I look at it. Work ethic is very, very important. You really need to differentiate the amount of work that each people do, and one person can't be slacking when the other person's working. It's really a combined teamwork. So making sure that person's work ethic is so important, to avoid any problems down the line. Working with Ashwin, I always knew how intense and how he could parallel, or if not work even harder than me at times. And so that was always an important point. Obviously, the one that everyone should think about is intellect. They should be smart. They should be able to kind of solve problems and think maybe not so similar to the way you think, but think of problems a bit differently to the way you think. And that's really where the role differentiations come in, where one person might be thinking more of the day-to-day, like how can we solve this crucial scientific problem, and the other person might be thinking about how can we take that small problem and overlay it on a larger problem, which whole area of medicine is really dealing with. So taking a small scientific problem and putting it on a large disease problem, and those two visions are very, very important and very keen to keep the company ticking on a day-to-day basis. Other than that, I think you need to get along with the person. Your work ethic, intellect, scientific expertise, all of that is great, but you just need to have a conversation with the person. It's almost like you're marrying someone, right? I speak to Ashwin more than I speak to anyone else in the whole world. There's always an open line with Ashwin, and it could be for everything. I could just be frustrated with how things are going, and I call him and I ask, and I just like tell him, hey, like, what do I do? Like, doesn't seem to be working right, and he just offers a different perspective. And it's almost when you feel like you're burning out, the other person just helps you to push you through things, and vice versa. And that, I think, that relationship is probably the single most important thing, because things aren't easy when you start thinking about building a startup. There's a lot of problems that you endure, so it's always how can you kind of come together and almost make each other better. It sounds quite romantic, but
it is. I mean, it is still a very pretty intimate relationship because you guys are together such a long time. But you briefly touched upon something which I want to ask one more question about, because you guys come from very similar backgrounds, right? Like you're both PhDs, you're both researching the same thing, and now you're running a startup, right? So how do you complement each other's kind of skills, strengths to create a synergy so that moves the startup forward, right? Like what do you do, what Ashwin does? How do you guys balance that?
Yeah. So Ashwin really likes the scientific side of things and really likes solving that complex problems. So our day-to-day, he's involved in all, planning, figuring out, designing all the experiments on how you can get A plus B to make C, for example. And that takes a lot of effort, a lot of brain power, and it's almost like solving multiple different puzzles at the same time. What I'm interested in is how can I take the output that is going to be generated and overlay that on a larger disease problem. So it could be, how can I figure out a timeline to get this all the way to the regulatory line? Or how can I figure out what would be the best disease area for that kind of solution to come in? Because it's always an intersection of the scientific side and the commercial side. How can I understand how the other competitors are working on identifying, let's say, similar or technologies and how they're using it? And really planning out the larger term vision is what I really enjoy doing. So I'm often clued in on what are the next 10 things in my area that are coming in next. While Ashwin helps me understand what is the best way you can make the thing that we're making in the lab to compete with the others.
Got it. That's really cool. So, you guys became part of the YC batch, I believe, winter 2024 batch.
Yes.
How's that experience? How's YC? How helpful was it? And how really changed the way you see entrepreneurship?
I think The impact of Y Combinator is you just can't really contain it. It's so much more and beyond. We were recommended by our friends in the batch before, and obviously we know so much about Y Combinator. We applied different companies, different ideas multiple times, didn't get in. But this time, when we got an interview and we actually took part in YC, it was like you couldn't really put that into words. I think the mentorship that you get at every level is really important. I think as biologists, the biggest feedback or expertise that they provide you is how to really make your storytelling part better, and that's so crucial when you think about raising investments. They put you in touch with so many successful people, and they help share their side of the story and how they took the startup forward. And also you're surrounded by other companies, and in our case we were also surrounded by a lot of different therapeutic companies who helped us understand the ecosystem better, helped us think about problems that we didn't know would happen down the line. So combine the group of people, the mentors, and the access to, let's say, super successful XYZ founders. That ecosystem really helps you thrive, and almost changes your mentality on how and what is normal. You've probably seen all of the founder mode stories coming up on LinkedIn and things like that. So it really helps you glued in to really think about what is really necessary for the startup. How can we build something lean, strong, and fast? And the experience is so different for each company. Yeah. And you get the most out of it depending on how much you put in.
Okay, fair. That's fair. You started your company in oncology therapeutics area, which tends to be a bit quite competitive landscape. Very saturated. How did you know that this was the right indication to pursue, like a right disease area to pursue, and how did you know that you're gonna have an edge when it comes to competition? Because especially investors really look for, because there's so many companies, right? Like they look for this edge to invest in. So how did you know that this is the one idea that's going to be good?
I think oncology is a very big and important market, but we don't only narrow ourselves down to oncology. I think oncology is a fantastic indication to think about first. But the way we really think about it is, what are the problems where the immune system isn't functioning well? And those are the diseases that we really can go after. So that could be oncology, that could be infections, that could be autoimmunity, anywhere where the immune system isn't working well. So the idea, and really to tell you a bit more of that, let me tell you a bit more about Granza Bio. The work behind Granza Bio started with work that was discovered in Professor Mike Dustin, our co-founder's lab at Oxford, on how our immune cells, specifically the killer immune cells, what are the mechanisms in which that they can kill a recipient cell, anything foreign, whether they could be cancers or infections or any foreign particle. And they do this by releasing these protein bombs called attack particles. And most often, the immune cells are not able to effectively release these protein bombs to kill a foreign particle. And what really we're doing at Granza Bio is taking that foundation of protein bombs and trying to recreate that and target that to multiple disease modalities. So oncology is super fascinating because it's an area which is very important, but oncology isn't the only area where our immune system isn't working effectively. So the way we look at it, oncology is an important area, autoimmunity is an important area. We have some data sets coming in on both, and we haven't narrowed down on where we're going to present just yet.
Got it. Actually, I have a question about attack particles. And, so from what you said, they don't seem like to be cancer type specific, as they can be applied in multiple indications, right?
Exactly.
Without disclosing any confidential information, it's, keep it as vague as you want. From one article I read, I think there was like this mention of precision shelf platform. And, so how does it that overcome the typical challenges you face in therapeutic delivery, and how do you go about it using these attack particles without so they target the cancer cells and they don't really affect the healthy tissue cells, which is a huge problem in most therapeutics.
So When you look at what an attack particle is, it's basically like a protein bomb like this with like killing components on the inside. And one of the most fascinating things was that shell that it was made of proteins. It was really, really fascinating compared to other delivery technologies. You could use that shell and you could remove the cargo inside and add whatever else you want on top of it and engineer it. And you could send that to different areas. And that shell showed far higher stability than some of the existing delivery technologies like LNPs. And also showed reduced immunogenicity, which means the immune system doesn't recognize it as a non-self. Um, so what was really fascinating for us before we thought about therapeutics was how could we make use of that shell from attack particles and load different cargoes inside of it and send that to different locations. So there's two different ways you can think about tropism, or which areas the shells would go to in the body, or biodistribution, different way of calling it. You can test that out in different models and see where these shells naturally go when you inject them. The other way you could increase targeting to specific areas is you could really add different receptors on top of these shells because they're made of proteins and you could do things with protein engineering. That increases the specificity of your shell, your precision shell, going into a particular area and binding into a particular target. So, by doing that, we've shown increased specificity of our attack particles towards a cell that's harmful, let's say, a cell that we targeted to, versus a normal healthy cell. So, long story short, the simple answer is we've added a receptor through protein engineering, and it helps us increase our targeting efficacy.
Oh my God, it's really cool. And oh yeah, that's pretty cool. Um, so you already mentioned about outside of oncology, you said autoimmune conditions can be another modality. What other indications you think this kind of like therapeutics could be applicable to?
I think those are the two ones that we're really focusing in on at the
Focus on.
moment.
Hmm.
Obviously, autoimmunity and cancer have multiple different branches underneath it. So we have a few hits we think would work really well, and we're testing the disease models in that. And I think for a startup at this stage, the most important thing is to not spread yourself too thin,
Hmm.
where you're trying to do too many things,
Hmm.
as opposed to trying to work on nailing one or two really key areas and get your results on that.
Got it. That's actually really interesting. So when it comes to narrowing down indications, what do you try to like? Obviously, you have to consider the market. You have to consider like just a lot of things, the landscape and etc. But what's your process of like narrowing down indications? Which ones to prioritize first compared to others?
Yeah, frankly, it's a simple equation.
Mm.
It's trying to find the intersect between your scientific data and the commercial landscape in the next
Mm.
5-10 years, and that intersect is really where your any company's kind of first disease indication should be.
Got it.
And I think you
Yeah.
can apply that model to any biotech companies.
And a private company. I mean, you guys were quite successful in that because you had a significant investor interest. I believe from the articles, you probably might have raised more after that, but you raised 7.14 million from Felicis Ventures and Y Combinator. And how do you approach like fundraising? How do you approach, which investors to work with? And how do you, because you said it's very important to storytelling aspect too. So how do you focus on your pitch and like narrating your idea, to investors?
Um, we could have just a whole session on how to fundraise for a biotech. But I think being in Y Combinator massively helped. They help you with two things. They help you with storytelling, and they help you with fundraising. When you're in Y Combinator, you're given almost a 2-week timeline to fundraise before there's something called the demo day, where any investor can just invest in you. So you put your investors in a pressure cooker situation where they don't have time to sit down and decide. They have to make a decision almost instantly. And I think that system works really well to fundraise for any company, let alone, including biotech. But I think the key things that are important for a biotech to fundraise is how could you, in a very simple way, narrow down that complex scientific problem into a few slides that people can understand? Most often than not, people try to explain a very complex story, and not everyone is a particular disease or area expert, and they won't understand it, and they lose you. So that first 10 minutes of every presentation is so important. It's so important that you explain your story in a very simple manner that they understand it enough that they can then ask the complex questions, which you have
Mm.
hundreds of data for. And I think that a lot of people will have different ideas on how to fundraise, but I think that is one of the most important things, making sure the other person actually understands what you're doing in the first 5 minutes. Because most often than not, a decision is made in the first 5 to 10 minutes, whether a company is interesting or not, before they think about longer due diligence.
Even with the biotech companies.
Any companies, I think,
Mm.
because investors have, I think, very short patience. They're there on a call to make sure they're proven wrong, most of the time. So in the first 5 to 10 minutes, they're judging, am I wasting my time here or not? And if they think they can understand what you're doing in a very simple way, whether complex, whether you're explaining complex biology or not, that really makes them feel like they understand what you're doing and that they could see the potential of your technology,
Mm.
rather than you iterating, this is the potential, that's what we're going to do, this is what's going to happen. So
Okay.
almost make them believe the story in the first 5-10 minutes with very little complex slides, and then get into the details after if it's required.
Got it. I'm sure YC was helpful in that, but I still want to ask a question because I remember like having conversation with some founders and they're like early on, like I didn't really know how to negotiate, how to like, how much equity to give up and stuff. What's your process for that
um, I think it depends on the company, it depends on the
company?
technology of the companies, it
Mhm.
depends on how much um, you know how the market is at the moment.
Mhm.
Very different market in 2021 versus very different market it is now. But I think at a seed stage level, it's very hard to draw a benchmark on anything with other companies. And I think valuations and other decisions are at a seed stage level has a lot of hype potential, let's say, and it's very hard to make sense of it. So I think it depends on a per
It
company
depends.
basis, and it's hard to generalize how things are
Got it.
going to do. And also, it's very different doing it in the UK versus doing it in the US.
True, true, true. Um, so now that you've raised funding, and obviously, again, you don't have to give the precise details, but like, how do you plan to use the funding? Are you focusing on more R&D right now? And what milestones should we, expect from Granza Bio in the coming years? Like, when do you, for example, plan to enter clinical trials? Hopefully.
Sure. With our funding right now, we're completing a bit of R&D, and by mid next year, we would have shown how our platform can work in, let's say, different disease modalities. And then really what we're going to focus on and doing is taking one particular disease modality and taking that all the way, seeing it all through IND studies, which you need to do for a therapeutic company, pre-IND, IND, manufacturing, and then think about a phase 1 clinical trial. Um, you know, Dates, etc., might change on how it goes. It might be quicker than you think, depending on how the results come from the lab. But really, our goal is to focus in on our lead indication and go full throttle on that.
Got it. Well, I wish tons of luck to you with that. We are coming towards the end of our episode, so I'm going to ask more kind of like a personal and behavioral kind of questions. Looking back, um, I guess what were the biggest challenges when you started transition from academia to entrepreneurship?
I think in the mindset, maybe.
Mindset.
In academia, you are trained to have a pessimistic, maybe not pessimistic, but more of a crude,
Yeah.
judgmental mindset where you question every single thing. Um, and I think that's so important. But when you start a company, you need to have a mix of that, rigorous judgment or rigorous analysis over data. But you also need to have an optimistic mindset where you see look, if that thing works, the huge potential, the huge upside of a product is so much more than one can comprehend. And that's really how you sell a dream, right? And that's really how you fundraise for a company, or try and recruit amazing people to work with you, and or amazing advisors to work with you. So it's a balance between taking that interrogative side of academia and putting and sprinkling a bit of optimism and forward looking to it. And I think judging that balance is tricky for people. And I can see academics kind of moving back into that academic answer sometimes when they ask us, like, is this going to work? And they're like, yeah, I think if this experiment works, it's going to work.
Yeah.
Rather than being sure about the results and saying, yes, this is going to work, and we're going to do that. And that mindset just comes with time. I'm still maybe a bit in the academic mindset, but I think it both are crucial. I think you're coming to an age where people really see the importance of founders that understand biology, understand the technical aspects of it, because you really need a technical person to really drive any company forward. So I think slowly the ecosystem is also changing and encouraging more of these technical founders to come start complex companies and do good.
God, you're still very much fresh into startup building, and it's learning in progress. So you're gonna learn things as you do more, right? But just looking back, in hindsight, what would you do differently?
What would I do differently? Oh,
It can be
there's
anything,
so many
really.
things that I can easily name that I would do differently. But I think the biggest take home for me that I've realized that helps me kind of go through is seeing how things have progressed every year for the past, let's say, 5, 6 years, and how things have changed. And for that to happen, I couldn't have done anything differently. Every stage was a huge learning curve, which, if you skip it, you don't really fully comprehend what happened. And I think every person's journey is equally important, because every decision you make is based on learnings you have from the past. So no, I don't think I would do anything differently, and I think things all work out for a reason, and hopefully for the best.
That's a very healthy outlook to have. Well, this is my final question. And again, thank you so much. It was really very informative and insightful. I guess my final question is, I still got to ask, because there are PhD students that are in our audience, or there are students in undergrads that are trying to get into PhD and start entrepreneurship journey. So what advice would you give to aspiring founders, specifically in the biotech space, especially considering the current, landscape, current market changes, and etc.?
I tell everyone to start early. Start trying to, go into accelerators, start trying to go into events, and try and understand how the biotech sector works. Because most often than not, it's that leap of, that chance you take that changes your entire your path. And if I hadn't met that first person that told me to do this, I probably wouldn't have been here. Maybe, I don't know. So I think there are a lot of opportunities for students right now. Start exploring what you can do with it. Start learning the possibilities. Go to some accelerators, learn a few things from there, and I think you will know how things are going, and you will know when the time is right. It's hard to give feedback for people on what exactly to do, but I think what helped me understand the ecosystem a lot was the fact that I took part in a lot of different accelerators. I got people's mindsets. I knew what they were looking for, and eventually that led me to where I am. So I think the most important thing is gathering as much knowledge as possible right now, whether that's scientific, which you do in the lab, but also commercial, where you go to events, accelerators, etc. And reach out to people. Most often than not, people will actually reply to your messages, and so many people have helped me answer questions. So don't feel let down, or if people don't reply to you, but do reach out to people and ask for feedback.
So just, if to summarize, just put yourself out there, increase your exposure, and just try.
Yeah,
Got it.
I think even now, I think that's what we have to do at startups as well, increase your exposure, because really those are how you get chances, and then
Exactly.
that's how you convert them.
True. Ashwin, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. I'm so glad that we made this happen finally. I'm wishing you tons of luck with your company, with your startup journey, and hope to hear more and more news, good news coming from your way, and with the hopes of staying in touch. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Javid. Yeah, and
Take care,
excited
Ashwin.
to see how this goes.
Bye bye.